Welcome to the Control Concepts Insider, where we take a look behind the scenes at Control Concepts, a leading independent AV programming firm established in 1997. I'm your host and tour guide, Steve Greenblatt, and I'm also Control Concepts president and founder. During each session, we will share what makes our company unique and contributes to our success. I'll have discussions with our team to share stories and insights from those who are responsible for doing the hard work to serve our clients and build our reputation as a recognizable industry name. So with that said, today I'm joined by two of our software developers. First, I'd welcome back who was on our last session, Jonathan Brenner. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hey there.
Thanks for being here. And I will now introduce Adam Hanson. He's new to our session, but been with Control Concepts for several years. Welcome, Adam.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Thanks for joining us today, guys. And what I wanted to do was continue our conversation. The last time we spoke, and Jonathan was part of the conversation, we got into what it means to be an AV software developer and how that differs from being an AV programmer. And I know it's a nuance, and it's probably more of a term that we've created internally, but we do take it pretty seriously because in our company, we really believe in following software development best practices that exist in the real world outside of AV. We try to bring in modern programming languages, and we try to follow some of the as many as we can of the rules and methodologies and approaches that a software development team would follow in any type of an industry. So reason that I wanted to make that introduction and also set the context was because Adam comes to us from outside of the AV world in doing software development. I mean, he had, and as he'll tell you, he has worked for a manufacturer within the AV industry, but wasn't a control programmer before coming to us per se. So Adam, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background and also kind of take us to what you've had to do to adapt to being in this type of an environment.
Okay. Yeah, my background is a little varied. I've worked in a couple different industries, microelectronics, some biometric stuff. But the lion's share of it has definitely been in the AV industry. I worked for Crestron for 14 years as a software developer. So yeah, my experience was not built on programming AV systems. It was writing software applications, which is definitely a different animal. I mean, to some extent they do go hand in hand, but they are different disciplines in a sense. So coming to Control Concepts and certainly getting more involved in AV programming and programming control systems, it's a great combination to have because you really get both sides of what a functioning system is supposed to do and how it's supposed to work. So you understand the front side programming and the user interface side of it. And then sort of more from the back end side and the software development side for drivers and modules and things like that, then you I guess in software lingo that would almost be like a full stack developer.
Which is a great tie-in, and thank you for setting that up for me. Jonathan, as we mentioned last time, comes to us from being a full stack, a training and education in full stack development. And we talked a little bit about what that means. So when you're looking at, Jonathan, when you're looking at, how you apply that to the AV world, we talked a little about it last time, but maybe you could kind of elaborate. And also what I'd like to touch on is Adam spoke about a few different aspects of AV programming, and we'll kind of go between that together and dive into them. But why don't you first start with the full stack part?
Yeah, so I mean, with the full stack stuff, it's mostly having to know a little bit of everything. So the way I've kind of equated that to AV stuff is, when I was doing full stack stuff, I'd need to know the hardware side of things just as much as the software side of things. I'd need to know about the networking involved with everything in the chain to get, a website to, be available to people. So there was, training in managing servers and, using, configuring Linux to run the server and the protocols in between, HTTP and building REST APIs and things like that. So it wasn't just software, it wasn't just knowing like the HTML and CSS and stuff. It was also knowing all the underlying stuff that had to be there for the whole thing to work. That's kind of where the full stack comes from, is you're not only front end, you're not only back end, you're everything in between and everything it takes to make it happen. So I kind of equate that to AV, and that AV integration programmers are dealing with the same kind of thing. Usually when they're out on site, they're troubleshooting, commissioning, all sorts of things, well beyond just the code they've loaded for controlling the system. They also have to know the hardware of the control manufacturer, as well as the standard network stuff. I know a lot of AV guys who, like myself, have gotten certifications in networking because they have to know that much about the networking that goes on behind it, which at first glance isn't something you would think you'd need to know for AV. So I think there's parallels there in just that integration AV programmers are dealing with so many different technologies and so many different layers of the OSI model, that it's kind of hand in hand. Same way I know software and hardware and full stack world, AV programmers have to do the same, just in a different, just in kind of a different context, really.
So Adam, with that said, and thank you, Jonathan, that was great background. How is that full stack concept? How much of a challenge is that for somebody coming into the AV world and being able to apply those skills that when you're doing application development, you're kind of working in a different environment than you are when you're working in an AV system or with AV hardware. How much ramp up time, or what were some of the challenges involved in that, in order for you to then be able to write the software that you write here?
I think that, the challenge is really to, you have to ramp up on the control platforms. I think that's kind of number one. You have to understand, just kind of like what Jonathan was saying. You really have to understand the hardware involved. You have to understand how it's all, working and communicating, and you have to understand, the control platform enough to know that, okay, I'm adding this device into this program, and I'm going to configure it so that it'll do these things during the course of using the program. So you really have to understand the inner workings of the control system platform, the tools behind it for programming that platform. Again, it's a little bit of a different skill set necessarily than learning a pure software language, but I would say there is a related discipline, in that if you, for me, coming from a software background, I feel like it kind of gave me a lift, in a sense, in that it's like I could sort of, as I became more familiar with each platform, then I can relate it to what's going on in the code behind, or what's going on in the control hardware behind the program, and so things would click faster and make sense faster, I think.
So just to kind of say that in different words, would you say that learning different platforms really help to let things sink in better and helped with the understanding? Or was that, or is there, what did you mean by that?
I think it does. I think learning different platforms, it gives you certainly a broader perspective. Each platform that we work with, they are unique, but there are some striking parallels. They all have tools used to write programs for that platform. They also have pure software languages behind them that you can develop in to extend those programs to do more than what you can accomplish within those tools. And they all have those components. They might be different languages, they might be different tools, but those elements are all there, which I find pretty fascinating. And so that sort of gives you a tie-in from a few different endpoints. One is you can relate one platform to another and kind of know, okay, to accomplish a certain feature, like program a certain feature, you're going to accomplish it in a certain way, whether you're using a tool to edit a program, or whether you're writing a software driver. However you're going to accomplish it, it'll be very apparent where that effort is going to go. So you can relate the platforms that way, and you can understand kind of where you're going to tailor your efforts to accomplish any of the objectives. So I'm speaking very generally, and I hope that's
Sure. No, it's good. It's good.
Well,
I'm gonna kind of roll into the whole idea of explaining writing a program versus writing the modules or drivers too, because I think that also comes into play here. Jonathan, I know that this is something that you're doing more of, and having that program, the system background and understanding the usage and the application and how the system operates definitely helps. And how do you apply that when you're writing a module? And just so that or a driver, and just so that I could explain for the audience, a module or driver is a purpose-built piece of code that would either communicate with a device and do what I consider the heavy lifting of knowing how the API works and meshing that with a program. So a programmer can easily control the device, or it's for another purpose of either middleware or other types of applications, but mostly you see them where we're interfacing with the device. But so let me get back to I'll get back to my question is how important is it to understand that that background of having of the system side when you're going and writing modules and drivers?
I think it's pretty important. I think it's really, really helpful to have that background, just to know how to build kind of the facade of what you're creating. So, it's simple enough to in the software side of things create functions that do what need to be done in terms of sending messages to devices or whatever. But knowing what an integrator is looking for, or like an integrator programmer is looking for when they're adding these drivers or modules to their code, knowing what hooks to provide, what kind of information needs to be provided, what kind of things they're going to use, what sort of stuff's just going to be noise that they're not going to want to deal with. Getting usually with, the AV integration stuff, you're looking for the quickest route to getting to what you need it to do. So to add a bunch of steps to making something work is never a good idea. And, the fewest clicks possible and things like that. So having that background, you kind of know how to tailor what you're creating to the people who are most likely going to use it. Obviously, you can create something that works just fine without that experience, but I think being able to provide something that is kind of intuitive in how you're supposed to implement it, just by knowing how it's going to be implemented, I think that works out really well.
I like that. And one of the things that I like to point out to people is that we actually use the modules and drivers that we write in our own projects. So it's helpful to be able to have that background, and it's something that we tout as being an important part rather than somebody who's an outsider who's trying to write that. But and Adam, I'm going to have you tell us a little bit from your perspective. Now, you a lot of times will be taking a device and writing a driver or module on different platforms using for the same device. How easy or difficult is that when it comes to having to go from one environment to another? Is it something where once you figure it out, it's kind of like translating, or is it a more to it than that?
I would say, generally speaking, like once you have a module design for one platform, at least as far as communicating with the device and the API that it provides and the types of calls you're going to be making, that's going to translate pretty well. So the languages, again, like the languages for the platform might be a little bit different between using C# versus Java versus Lua, things like that. But the overall functionality of a module will be relatively consistent because you're using the same API for any of those devices that are going to have a module, to support a particular device.
And I also wanted to point out one thing that Jonathan said. I thought that was interesting too, is that you have to really cater to what a programmer is going to need and keep it simple and not put in extra steps. So that's where I think understanding the application and being able to write the code where you're using the modular driver comes in. And that's kind of goes back to the idea that we can have the software development expertise, but we also have to understand what our application is and where we're planning to use that in the AV world. While we're kind of heading towards wrapping up, one of the things I wanted to touch on a little bit is that there are definitely a lot of people that are looking to try to figure out their next steps in the AV world, and part of that, it might be getting into software development, maybe doing other programming languages. So, Jonathan, I'll start with you since it's kind of in your wheelhouse right now. Is what type of advice or insight can you share with somebody, whether it's this is really hard or this is something easy, or what tips would you tell people that are thinking about going that route?
Probably the best tip would be to get an understanding of the AV integration side of things in advance, I'd say. I think that was the hardest transition point going from just kind of general software development stuff into AV was I went straight into Crestron, so I kind of lost the world of variables and functions and stuff when I went into the flow-based simple stuff. So but it makes sense when you're understanding the AV integration side of things and the point of control processors and kind of the point of AV and what it's trying to accomplish. So I think that was what I needed to catch up on the most coming into the AV industry was what am I developing on and what am I trying to accomplish with it? And then the rest kind of starts to make more sense as to why you have to do things a certain way. And then you can kind of come back after you've got that understanding and go, okay, well, I get this is what I need to do. Now I can apply my previous software knowledge to do it in a more elegant way.
So just a follow up to that, how important was it to have that previous software knowledge when you were getting into AV?
I think it was helpful. Obviously, there was no direct application for it when I got started. Like there was no building HTML pages or anything like that when I first got into AV. But I think it was still important to have kind of the mentality of I sound like a broken record. The mentality of like full stack development of just
Sure.
knowing what you need to know when you need to know it. Just because not worrying about the nitty gritty details and just getting the higher level. This is what this is what we're trying to accomplish. I went into trying to figure out Crestron from that kind of variable and function equals what in simple, and you can't really do that. You kind of have to abandon that initial concept, but then when you come back, you can make it make more sense, and you can understand the programming paradigms of loops and control structures and data types and that sort of thing. And it really helps enhance your AV development efforts. You can get into the baseline stuff without it. Obviously, there's plenty of people who just go straight into Crestron training and do perfectly well at developing systems and stuff. But if you have that previous software development background, you can really enhance, really improve, better that just baseline knowledge of how to make a Crestron system do whatever you can make any system do stuff in a more elegant, modular kind of way.
And I'll just a quick little anecdote, that the we're lucky that we're in the situation in 2021 having the tools and having the enhancements that we have, because back in the day, I still remember trying to figure out, like, how do you do an if then or a for loop in when you're dealing with just symbols, which is very shocking to people that came to this industry, or at least came to Crestron programming from a software background. Adam, for other people that are kind of in your shoes, what would you recommend that they do to kind of embrace the AV world? There's a lot, like, AV sometimes can be looked down upon, or it can be discounted. There's a lot of people who look for maybe more glamorous industries, and so kind of give us a little bit of a elevator pitch, if you will, or so some of the highlights of what is exciting about the role that you have, and how you've come into the AV world and be able to spread your wings a little bit.
I think the best advice I could give anyone who is sort of, like software development, understands engineering and all that, but wants to get into AV, get yourself a control system and just jump in. Because for me, my experience programming AV was programming my own home. And I did that. I was almost out of necessity, but I wanted to do it because I wanted to at least have a little bit of an understanding, a better understanding of how this whole thing works and what can I do with it. And when you get into it, when you start to taste it a little bit and you see, the cool things, then, it's kind of like a drug. You just want more and more, and you want to keep doing more. And it's like, oh, and then all of a sudden you're like buying a car and saying, oh, gee, can I control this? It's just like things start to just expand and multiply, and you think about things a little bit differently. So, obviously, there's, that suggestion, there's money involved and things like that, but really what it comes down to is if you can get some hands-on experience, whether out in the field or in your home, if you can be in front of it and actually see AV programming live in action, there's a definite wow factor there, and it's very cool, and it has a lot of benefits from security, advanced security, to energy savings, to simplified functionality, kids not losing remotes all over the place because they got one button on one panel, and that's all you have to hit to bring up your favorite program. So there's just for somebody who thinks programming and software development is fun or enjoyable, and they love seeing the fruits of that labor, I think the AV industry is really well tailored, because first of all, it includes toys, hardware toys you get to play with, and second of all, you get to program them and you get to see this stuff working, every day, and it makes your environment fun and cool and easy.
That's what I've always said is what keeps me interested with AV programming, and is more exciting than building websites, is that you actually get to see physically things do stuff. So I think that's a really good point.
Well, I appreciate that, guys, and that's probably a good place for us to stop. But very fascinating, and I always feel good when I can walk away from these conversations learning a little bit, also getting to hear some things that we may not have talked about personally. So that these are always good things. So thank you guys for sharing and being part of the conversation. I thank everybody for listening and spending time with us to learn more about control concepts. By taking a look behind the scenes, we hope that you'll get to know us better, become more familiar with our team, and find that you'll connect with our core values and mission, just as I did a little bit. Please reach out to any of us directly and visit our website, controlconcepts.net, and check us out on social media as well. So that's all we have today for this session of Control Concepts Insider.